In 2022, the United States made a decision designed to stop China. It was aimed at one company in particular, Huawei. The plan was simple, and on paper, it looked unbeatable. Cut China off from the most advanced computer chips in the world, the chips that power artificial intelligence, and you slow China's rise to a crawl. It was one of the most aggressive economic moves of the century, and it did something almost nobody in Washington expected. It backfired completely. Because just 4 years later, the American company at the center of this story, Nvidia, one of the most valuable companies on the planet, went from controlling around 95% of China's AI chip market to controlling almost exactly zero. And the company that took it all was the very one America was trying to destroy. This is the story of how the most powerful economic weapon of our time was aimed at China. Pull the trigger and hit the shooter. Stay with me. Because to understand how a plan this big could go this wrong, you first have to understand what these chips actually are and why whoever controls them may end up controlling the future itself. Let me start with the thing everyone is fighting over: AI chips. You have almost certainly heard of artificial intelligence by now. The chatbots, the image generators, the tools that can write and reason and answer almost any question. But behind every single one of those AI systems is a physical object, a chip, a piece of silicon smaller than your hand that does the actual thinking. These are not the ordinary chips that run your laptop. Training a modern AI model requires a very special kind of processor, one designed to do an enormous number of calculations at the same time. Let me explain the difference simply because it matters. A normal computer chip is like a single brilliant genius. It solves problems one after another incredibly fast in sequence. That is perfect for most everyday computing. But artificial intelligence does not work that way. Training an AI is more like needing millions of simple sums done all at once, in parallel. And for that, you do not want one genius. You want an army of thousands of ordinary workers, all calculating simultaneously. That is exactly what an AI chip is. Thousands of small processing cores working together in parallel, chewing through the mountains of math that a neural network requires. This kind of chip grew out of the graphics cards originally built to render video games, which by coincidence needed exactly this kind of parallel power. And for years, one company made this better than anyone else on earth, an American company called Nvidia. Nvidia's AI chips became the single most important product in the technology world. Every major AI company, in America, in Europe, and crucially in China, depended on them. If you wanted to build a serious artificial intelligence, you needed Nvidia chips. There was really no alternative. And there is one more crucial detail that made this choke point so powerful. Nvidia does not even manufacture most of its own chips. It designs them, and the actual physical manufacturing of the most advanced chips happens at a single company in Taiwan, using machines built by a single company in the Netherlands. The entire most advanced AI supply chain on Earth runs through a tiny number of companies, almost all of them tied to the United States and its closest allies. China sat at the end of this chain, dependent on all of it. This gave the United States something extraordinary, a choke point, a single lever that could control who got to build the future. And in 2022, America decided to pull that lever. The logic in Washington went like this: artificial intelligence is the most important technology of the coming century. It will decide economic power. It will decide military power. And right now, the entire world depends on American chips to build it. So if we simply refuse to sell our most advanced chip to China, we can lock China out of the AI race before it even really begins. We hold the choke point. All we have to do is squeeze. So the United States introduced sweeping export controls. It became illegal to sell Nvidia's most powerful AI chips to Chinese companies, and the primary target the company America was most determined to cripple was Huawei. Now, you need to understand why Huawei, because this was not a random choice. Huawei was, to Washington, the single most threatening technology company in China. It was a giant in telecommunications, building the backbone of mobile networks around the world. The United States had spent years warning its allies not to use Huawei equipment, fearing it could be used for spying. Huawei was seen as the crown jewel of Chinese technology and the sharpest edge of China's rise. So when America built this economic weapon, Huawei was the bullseye. Cut Huawei off from advanced chips, the thinking went, and you cut the head off Chinese technology. For a moment, it looked like it might work. The restrictions hit hard. Huawei's smartphone business, which had been soaring and was on track to become the biggest in the world, was hammered almost overnight. Without access to the best chips and to key software, its phones lost their competitive edge. Sales in some categories fell off a cliff. Access to the best chips vanished. Many analysts in the West wrote Huawei off, treating it as a company that had been successfully knocked out of the top tier of global technology. The weapon appeared to be working exactly as designed. And then a few years later, Huawei did something that stunned the industry. It released a new flagship smartphone containing an advanced chip that it was not supposed to be able to make. Analysts took the phone apart, examined the chip inside, and realized that Huawei and China's domestic chip industry had made a leap forward that the export controls were specifically designed to prevent. It was the first clear public signal that the plan was not working the way Washington had hoped. The patient was not dying. The patient was building its own medicine. But here is where the story turns. And it turns on a mistake in thinking so fundamental that it reshaped the global technology landscape. The people who designed this plan assumed something very specific. They assumed that if you took away China's access to advanced chips, China would simply be stuck, unable to build them itself, dependent, weakened, and forced to fall behind. The entire strategy rested on one belief, that China could not or would not build its own. That assumption was wrong. Because when you take a nation of China's size, its industrial capacity, its enormous pool of engineers, and its absolute determination, and you back it into a corner, you do not necessarily weaken it. Sometimes you light a fire under it. You take a country that was comfortable buying American chips and you give it no choice but to build its own. And you turn a customer into a competitor. Cut off from Nvidia, China did not give up. It went to work. The government poured enormous resources into building a domestic chip industry. And at the very center of that effort was the exact company America had tried hardest to destroy, Huawei. Huawei, locked out of American technology, began designing its own AI chips, a family of processors called Ascent. In the beginning, they were behind. They could not match Nvidia's best, they were harder to produce, and China could not make them in the same enormous quantities. But they existed. They worked. They improved with each generation. And crucially, inside China, they had something Nvidia no longer had. They were allowed to be sold. This is the part that the architects of the export controls seem to have underestimated most. A chip that is somewhat less powerful but actually available beats a chip that is more powerful but banned. If a Chinese AI company cannot legally buy Nvidia's best chip at any price, then Huawei's homegrown chip is not competing against Nvidia. It is competing against nothing. And nothing is very easy to beat. The ban did not just open a door for Huawei, it cleared the entire room. And then the balance began to shift with astonishing speed. Let me give you the numbers because they are genuinely staggering. In 2024, Nvidia controlled around 95% of China's market for advanced AI chips. Almost total dominance. By 2026, according to Nvidia's own chief executive, their share had collapsed to essentially zero. Jensen Huang, the head of Nvidia, said it plainly. The company had, in his words, largely conceded the Chinese market to Huawei. He described Huawei as one of the most formidable technology companies in the world. Think about what a stunning admission that is. The leader of the most valuable chip company on the planet, publicly stating that he has lost one of the biggest markets on earth to a rival that 4 years earlier was supposed to be crushed. This is one of the fastest collapses in market share in the history of the technology industry. It took less than 5 years. And Huawei did not just survive, it is thriving. The company is now targeting the shipment of hundreds of thousands of AI chips, and its chip revenue is projected to reach around $12 billion in a single year, a huge jump from the year before. A new leader in the Chinese market was forming in real time, built directly out of the pressure that was meant to destroy it. For Nvidia, the cost was brutal. China had once accounted for around a fifth of its most valuable business, its data center revenue. That entire slice of the business was effectively written off. In just 3 months, the company recorded billions of dollars in charges tied to the restrictions. A fifth of one of the most profitable business lines in the world, gone. Now, let me stop and be fair here, because the full picture is more balanced than a simple story of American defeat, and honesty matters. First, Nvidia is not in trouble. Far from it. Even while losing China entirely, the company is posting record-breaking results, with revenue soaring past $80 billion in a single quarter, driven by insatiable demand for AI chips everywhere else in the world. Losing China hurt, but the rest of the planet is buying so many chips that Nvidia is bigger than ever. This is not a story of Nvidia collapsing. It is a story of Nvidia being forced out of one enormous market and a Chinese champion rising to fill it. Second, Huawei has not actually caught up on pure technology. Nvidia's chips are still generally more capable, especially the very best ones. And Nvidia holds one especially powerful advantage that is easy to overlook: its software. Over more than 15 years, Nvidia built a software platform called CUDA. Think of it as the language that AI is written in. An entire generation of engineers across the whole world learned to build artificial intelligence using CUDA. All their tools, all their code, all their experience is tied to it. This is what people mean when they talk about a moat. It is not just that Nvidia makes a great chip. It is that the entire world already knows how to use it, and switching to something else means relearning almost everything. Huawei has built its own alternative software platform, but developers who have used it say it still lags well behind, harder to work with and less mature. This makes building on Huawei's chips more expensive and more frustrating, which slows adoption even inside China. Building the chip is only half the battle. Building the ecosystem of software and knowledge around it is the other half, and there Nvidia still leads by a wide margin. Crossing that gap could take many years, and it is far from guaranteed. So this is not a claim that China has won the chip war. It has not. In the most advanced manufacturing, China is still behind, still working to catch up. Making the most cutting-edge chips requires extraordinarily complex machines that China cannot yet fully build for itself, and it remains locked out of some of the most advanced manufacturing equipment on Earth. There are real hard limits China has not yet overcome. Its chips are reportedly produced in smaller quantities and at higher cost than Nvidia's. The gap at the very top is real. But that is exactly what makes this story so important. Because the goal of the export controls was never to make it a fair fight. The goal was to prevent China from having a serious domestic AI chip industry at all. And on that specific goal, the policy did not just fail, it produced the opposite result. Consider the irony as clearly as you can. Before the restrictions, China was happily dependent on American chips. Every Chinese AI company was a loyal Nvidia customer, sending its money to an American firm tied to American technology. That dependence was itself a form of control. As long as China needed American chips, America had leverage. The export controls destroyed that leverage. By forcing China to build its own chips, America eliminated the very dependence that gave it power in the first place. It traded a China that relied on American technology for a China that is building a complete independent alternative. And an independent competitor is far more dangerous in the long run than a dependent customer ever was. Even Jensen Huang himself has warned about this repeatedly and publicly. He has pointed out that if China builds a thriving domestic chip ecosystem and if the world's AI increasingly runs on Chinese hardware, that is a strategic loss for America, not a win. He raised a specific fear that a popular AI model might one day be designed to run best on Chinese chips rather than American ones. If that happens, developers all over the world far beyond China might start building on Chinese hardware simply because it works better for them. The American choke point will not just be gone, it could be replaced by a Chinese one. He has argued essentially that shutting China out could backfire by handing China both the incentive and the market to build a complete rival to Nvidia itself. When the chief executive of the company at the center of the policy is publicly warning that the policy may be self-defeating, it is worth listening. His own words suggest the weapon may have been pointed the wrong way. Step back and look at the whole picture. This is one of the great lessons in the limits of economic warfare. A superpower identified a choke point, a genuine one, and decided to squeeze it to hold the rival down. The move was logical, aggressive, and precise, and it produced almost exactly the opposite of what it intended. The plan assumed China was weak, that it could not build its own. It assumed dependence would last forever. It assumed that cutting off supply would cause collapse rather than provoke creation. Every one of those assumptions turned out to be wrong. And the result is that the company America most wanted to destroy is now stronger in its home market than the American giant that once dominated it. There is an old idea that applies here perfectly. Necessity is the mother of invention. Take away a nation's ability to buy something it desperately needs, and you may simply force it to learn how to make that thing itself. You do not remove the need, you remove the dependence and leave the need behind to drive them forward. America aimed the most powerful economic weapon of the modern age squarely at Huawei. It pulled the trigger, and 4 years later, Huawei is bigger in China than ever, Nvidia is locked out, and the brand new Chinese chip industry has been born from the pressure. It makes you wonder about every other choke point in the world right now. How many of them are real sources of power, and how many are just inventions waiting to be triggered by someone deciding to squeeze too hard? If you find these hidden turning points as fascinating as I do, subscribe, because there is far more of this story still to come, and the world is shifting faster than the headlines admit. And tell me what you think in the comments. Did America make a historic strategic blunder by forcing China to build its own chips, or was slowing China down, even at this cost, still the right thing to do? The most thoughtful answer gets pinned.